Can we talk for a minute about the heavy truth of the modern condition? Because I have a question that keeps a billion people staring blankly at their ceiling before their alarm even rings. Why do you wake up exhausted, even after sleeping for 8 perfect hours? If you've ever felt that heavy, crushing sense of having already failed the day before it's even begun, this message is the quiet you've been searching for. Before we dive into the deep, quiet architecture of exhaustion, I need a quick favor. This is a brand new channel, a passion project dedicated to slowing down the endless noise, and we're trying to hit our first major milestone, 100 subscribers. If this story, this truth resonates with you, please click that subscribe button right now. We're also aiming for 50 likes on this video. Hit the like button to tell the algorithm this message needs to be heard. We appreciate you being here. Now let's get into it. The phenomenon is ubiquitous, yet its source remains stubbornly invisible, a glitch in the perfected matrix of modern wellness. Waking up, after a statistically flawless night of sleep, more exhausted than when the head first hit the pillow. This is the phantom fatigue of the modern age, a weariness that is not merely physiological, but existential, rooted in the chronic violation of the soul's inherent need for emptiness. It is the signature wound left by the relentless, invisible war waged upon the human capacity for focused attention and the sacred necessity of mental negative space. We do not suffer from a simple lack of rest. We suffer from a profound systemic lack of release, a failure to disconnect the primary processing unit from the network when the day is done. The human mind, an engine forged by evolutionary pressure over millennia to handle the rhythmic scarcity of vital information, a fleeting shadow, the distant scent of predator, the movement of the herd, the changing angle of the sun, is now ruthlessly besieged by a deluge of engineered abundance. We exist in a perpetual state of sensory saturation, a dense, shimmering fog of data that is impossible to navigate without incurring massive cognitive cost. Every single moment of the waking day is a compulsory micro-decision point, a continuous filtering exercise. The brain is forced to process the metadata of existence. Which notification deserves immediate dismissal? Which headline must be compulsively ingested for perceived social or professional competence? Which peer's digitally curated perfection must be mentally processed and compared against the raw, unedited, often chaotic footage of one's own inner life? This is not passive intake. It is active, energy-draining work, a continuous act of prioritization and emotional labor. This constant input generates the cognitive debt that accrues silently, insidiously, a shadow balance on the soul's deepest ledger that no amount of deep breathing, optimal heart rate variability, or precisely measured core temperature can ever erase. This debt is the sum of all tasks left suspended in the short-term memory loop, all anxieties queued for future, often unnecessary, rumination, and the sheer computational load of filtering a billion data points down to the handful required for immediate function and survival. The exhaustion is not fundamentally metabolic. It is an opportunity cost of attention. The vital energy that should have been dedicated to deep focused thought, sustained creativity, or simple pure joy is instead swallowed, hour by hour, by the ceaseless, bureaucratic administration of digital minutiae and self-surveillance. The tyranny of the always-on state is a self-imposed psychological prison where the external world has achieved perfect, frictionless penetration of the inner sanctum. The essential firewall between professional anxiety and personal stillness has dissolved completely into the ether of ubiquitous Wi-Fi signals and the sheer, overwhelming pull of device dependency. The perceived necessity of constant, immediate and high-quality response compels the subconscious to maintain an elaborate, resource-heavy